Do not touch the Moonstone. Victoria Hale's warning followed Hannah Miller into the sacred den long after the door closed behind her. Dawn had not yet reached the eastern windows, and the chamber was lit only by silver lamps set into the stone walls. Hannah stood alone with a bucket of warm water, a folded cloth, and the quiet certainty that everyone who had sent her there expected nothing from her. That was familiar. At 27, she had spent 11 years being called wolfless, empty, unfinished. No shift, no powerful scent, no place in the rituals that mattered. Victoria had assigned her the cleaning because, as one attendant had laughed before leaving, at least the stone cannot reject someone it cannot even notice. Hannah had not answered. She rarely did. Words spoken by people who had already decided what she was never seemed worth chasing. She knelt near the altar and began wiping dust from the black stone floor. The Moonstone rested above her on a carved pedestal, pale and silent, no larger than a human heart. According to palace stories, it had not truly awakened in nearly a century. It responded during ceremonies with a faint glow, nothing more. Hannah kept her eyes down. Clean the floor. Do not touch the stone. She moved around the base carefully, working the cloth into the narrow grooves where silver dust had settled. When the fabric brushed the lowest edge of the pedestal, something changed. A pulse of light moved through the stone beneath her hand. Hannah froze. The Moonstone flashed once. Then darkness. She stared at it. No. The word left her quietly. She pulled the cloth back. Another flash. Brighter this time. Hannah rose too quickly and nearly knocked over the bucket. I did not touch you. The Moonstone answered with a third pulse. Silver light spilled across the altar, climbed the carved pillars, and raced through markings Hannah had never noticed in the floor. Then a sound rolled through the sacred Denver. One deep bell. Hannah stopped breathing. The bell had no rope, no visible mechanism. It was built into the oldest part of the chamber and, according to every servant who had ever whispered about it, had not rung in living memory. A second note followed, then a third. Somewhere beyond the sealed doors, footsteps started. Hannah backed away from the altar until her shoulders touched the cold wall. The Moonstone should have gone dark when she moved. It did not. It grew brighter. The silver light turned almost white, filling the den until every carved symbol stood clear. Hannah lifted both hands as if someone might accuse her of holding the answer. I am not touching it. The doors opened hard enough to echo. Alpha King Lucas Blackwood entered first, tall and broad-shouldered in a dark ceremonial coat, followed by Beta Daniel Carter, Moon Priestess Margaret Reed, and Victoria. Lucas looked from Hannah to the glowing stone. His expression sharpened. Victoria went pale. What did you do? Hannah met her eyes. Nothing. Victoria stepped forward. That stone does not awaken for servants. Hannah looked back at the altar. The Moonstone pulsed again. Margaret stopped beside Lucas, her face suddenly unreadable. Daniel whispered, "It is still responding." Lucas did not take his eyes off Hannah. To what? No one answered. Then the Moonstone gave another brilliant flash. Even though Hannah stood nearly 15 feet away, Margaret drew in a slow breath. Not to what? She looked directly at the girl everyone had called wolfless. To whom? Touch it again. Lucas Blackwood's voice was calm, but the sacred den had become so quiet that the words seemed to strike the stone itself. Hannah looked at him, then at the Moonstone still glowing above the altar. Victoria Hale stepped forward at once. Your Majesty, that is not necessary. She may have disturbed the ceremonial seal. Margaret Reed did not look away from the stone. If the seal were damaged, the light would be unstable. Daniel Carter glanced toward the carved floor. It is not unstable. The silver glow pulsed once, slow and even. Lucas turned back to Hannah. What happened before we entered? I was cleaning around the pedestal. Did you touch the Moonstone? No. The pedestal? The cloth brushed the lower edge. Victoria folded her arms. Convenient. Hannah met her eyes. I did not ask it to light. Lucas watched Hannah for another second, then gestured toward the altar. Show me. Hannah did not move immediately. Her palms felt cold despite the warmth of the lamps. For 11 years, people had looked at her and seen absence. No wolf. No rank. No reason to matter. Now the most sacred object in Silvercrest was glowing because she had stood near it, and somehow that felt more frightening than being ignored. She walked forward. Each step echoed. When she reached the pedestal, she stopped. Where? Lucas asked. Hannah pointed to the lower carved edge. There. Touch it. Victoria inhaled sharply. Your Majesty. Lucas did not look at her. If the stone is reacting to damage, we need to know. If it is reacting to Hannah, we need to know that too. Hannah placed 2 fingers against the pedestal. The moonstone flared. Light rushed across the chamber so quickly that Daniel stepped back. Margaret whispered something under her breath. The floor carvings brightened one after another, forming a circle around Hannah's feet. Hannah pulled her hand away. The light faded slightly, but did not disappear. Lucas stepped closer to the altar. Move aside. Hannah obeyed. He placed his palm against the same section of stone. Nothing happened. The moonstone dimmed. Lucas frowned. He tried again, this time placing his hand directly against the polished surface. Still nothing. Victoria looked unsettled now. Perhaps it exhausted whatever energy she triggered. Margaret shook her head. No. Lucas removed his hand. Then explain it. Margaret slowly approached Hannah. Stand beside the pedestal again. Hannah did. The moonstone brightened before she touched anything. Daniel stared. It knows where she is. Hannah's breath caught. Lucas looked from the stone to her. Why? Margaret's expression had changed from surprise to something close to recognition. I do not know yet. Victoria gave a short laugh that carried no humor. There must be another explanation. She has no wolf. The words landed exactly where they always did. Hannah looked down for half a second. The moonstone flashed so brightly that every silver lamp in the den seemed dull by comparison. Margaret turned sharply toward Victoria. Perhaps that assumption is the problem. Silence. Victoria's face hardened. She has never shifted. That is not the same as being empty. Hannah looked at Margaret. No one had ever said that to her before. Lucas noticed the change in her expression. What do you know? He asked Margaret. The moon priestess walked around the altar, studying the floor. Only fragments. Old ceremonial references. Stories that were removed from later records. Daniel frowned. Removed? Before Margaret could answer, a thin line of silver light appeared beneath the moonstone. It moved down the pedestal, crossed the floor, and continued toward the rear wall of the sacred Denver. Everyone turned. The line stopped at a section of stone Hannah had cleaned dozens of times without noticing anything unusual. Then a symbol appeared there, glowing beneath the surface. Hannah went still. She knew that shape. 3 curved lines surrounding a small circle. She had drawn it absent-mindedly since childhood. On scraps of paper. In dust. Along the margins of old books. Lucas looked at her. You recognize it? Hannah swallowed. Yes. From where? Her eyes stayed fixed on the symbol. I do not know. Margaret stepped closer to the wall, her face slowly losing color. I do. Lucas turned to her. Margaret lifted one trembling hand toward the glowing mark. That symbol belonged to an order that disappeared from Silvercrest records generations ago. Hannah looked at her. What order? Margaret met her eyes. The Moonkeepers. The Moonkeepers? Hannah repeated, and the word felt strangely familiar in her mouth. Margaret Reed did not answer immediately. She stood before the glowing symbol, as if afraid one careless breath might erase it again. Lucas Blackwood moved closer, his expression controlled but intent. You said the order disappeared from the records. Most references did, Margaret said. I only saw the name once, years ago, in a damaged ceremonial index. Victoria Hale crossed her arms. Then perhaps this is nothing more than an old title. Margaret turned toward her. Old titles do not make the Moonstone awaken. The room fell quiet again. Hannah looked at the symbol on the wall. 3 curved lines around a circle. She had drawn it since childhood without knowing why. On steamed windows. In dust. Along the edges of school papers when teachers whispered that she would never shift. She stepped closer. Can it open? Daniel Carter asked. Lucas studied the seams in the stone. There is no visible lock. Hannah lifted one hand, then stopped before touching it. May I? Lucas looked at her. It responded to you. I think you should decide. That answer surprised her more than permission would have. Hannah placed her fingertips against the center of the symbol. The wall gave a low vibration. A narrow line appeared along the stone, then another. Slowly, a hidden panel moved inward. Cold air spilled from the darkness beyond. Victoria took one step back. Daniel raised a lamp. Behind the wall was not a passage, but a small chamber no larger than a storage room. Its walls were covered in carvings. At the center stood an empty stone stand shaped like 2 open hands. Margaret entered first, reading the nearest inscription under her breath. Hannah followed. Lucas remained close enough to protect without crowding her. The words carved into the far wall were old, but clear. Margaret traced them carefully. The moon does not speak only through the wolf. Hannah stopped breathing. Lucas looked at her. What does that mean? Margaret swallowed. Exactly what it says. Victoria frowned. That is impossible. The bond to the moon is expressed through the wolf. That is what current doctrine teaches, Margaret said. This predates current doctrine. Hannah stared at the sentence. 11 years of shame pressed against it. 11 years of healers telling her to be patient, elders telling her to accept limitation, pack members speaking softly around her as though she had failed some natural test. If that is true, Hannah said quietly, then not shifting does not mean there is nothing there. Margaret looked at her. No. The answer was simple. It nearly broke something open inside Hannah. Lucas saw her fingers curl against her palm. You were told otherwise? She gave a short, humorless breath. Everyone was told otherwise. Daniel moved to another section of the wall. There are names here. Margaret joined him. Rows of carved titles ran beneath moon symbols. Guardian, Witness, Keeper, Listener. Then one word appeared repeatedly beside the symbol Hannah had drawn since childhood. Moonkeeper. Victoria stepped closer, now despite herself. What were they? Margaret read farther. Not alphas. Not lunas. Not priests exactly. Lucas looked at the inscriptions. Then what authority did they have? Margaret's face changed. Enough that someone later wanted the position forgotten. Hannah turned. Why? Margaret did not answer yet. She had found a smaller inscription near the floor, partly hidden beneath mineral dust. Hannah knelt and wiped it clean with the same cloth she had carried in to clean the sacred Denver. The irony was not lost on her. Letters appeared slowly beneath the gray film. Daniel held the lamp lower. Margaret read aloud. When Crown and Wolf mistake dominance for the will of the Moonkeeper speaks. Lucas went still. Victoria's expression tightened. Hannah looked from the words to the hidden chamber around them. So they could challenge the crown. It appears so, Margaret said. Lucas did not react defensively. He looked at the wall for a long moment. And then they vanished. Hannah rose. No. Everyone looked at her. She touched the carved symbol gently. They did not vanish. Her eyes moved to the sealed wall that had hidden them for generations. Someone made sure no one would remember they were here. If someone erased them, I want to know who. Hannah's voice followed them from the hidden chamber into the council hall less than an hour later. The room had filled quickly. Elders, ceremonial officers, 2 royal archivists, Daniel Carter, Victoria Hale, Margaret Reed, and Alpha King Lucas Blackwood all took their places beneath the high silver windows. Hannah stood alone near the end of the long table. Not seated. Not invited to be comfortable. Elder Samuel Whitmore studied her as though she were an unexpected stain on an old document. Ancient inscriptions are easily misunderstood, he said. Words change meaning over generations. Margaret placed copied symbols from the hidden chamber on the table. The phrase was clear. Samuel barely looked at them. Clear to you. Victoria folded her hands. And even if this so-called Moonkeeper order existed, that does not give a palace servant ceremonial rank. Hannah looked at her. I did not ask for rank. Yet the Moonstone reacted to you. That happened before I knew what a Moonkeeper was. Victoria's mouth tightened. Lucas watched the exchange without interrupting until Samuel spoke again. Your Majesty, this discovery could unsettle every pack attending tomorrow's renewal ceremony. The girl should be removed from the sacred den until proper scholars review the matter. Hannah felt the word girl land exactly as intended. Small, temporary, easy to move. Lucas turned to her instead. Do you want to leave the palace while we investigate this? Several people looked surprised. Hannah was one of them. Leave. You are not under arrest. You are not required to stay. Lucas's tone remained even. If you want distance from this, I will arrange it. Hannah looked at the copied Moonkeeper symbol. 11 years of being told what she lacked. 11 years of lowering her eyes when someone described her as incomplete. Then she looked at Margaret. I have been told for 11 years that I am missing something. Her voice did not rise, but the room quieted around it. Now I want to know who decided that. Margaret held her gaze. Then I will search the oldest ceremonial records. Samuel leaned back. You are encouraging this. Margaret turned toward him. I am investigating history. History does not become truth because a frightened servant recognizes a symbol. Hannah's eyes moved to Samuel. I am not frightened. He studied her. You should be careful. Lucas's expression changed. That is enough. Samuel fell silent. Lucas looked at Margaret. How long? Give me access to the sealed pre-reform archive. Daniel frowned. That section has not been opened in decades. Then today seems appropriate. Lucas nodded. Open it. By late afternoon, dust covered Margaret's sleeves, and 3 long tables in the archive were crowded with brittle records. Hannah stayed beside her, reading names she had never seen before. Moonkeeper appeared repeatedly in documents older than a century. Then suddenly, it stopped. Not gradually. Completely. Margaret compared the dates. 81 years ago. Daniel looked up. What happened then? Margaret pulled another volume closer. A ceremonial restructuring under King Edmund Blackwood. Lucas, standing across the table, went still at the family name. Hannah watched him. Your ancestor? My great-grandfather. Margaret found a decree folded into the spine of the ledger. The wax seal was cracked, but the crest remained visible. A black wolf beneath a crown. House Blackwood. Margaret read silently first. Her face tightened. What does it say? Lucas asked. She looked at him. It removes all Moonkeeper authority from sacred den proceedings and transfers final ritual judgment to the crown. Hannah felt something cold settle inside her. So they were not forgotten. Margaret shook her head. No. Daniel looked at the decree. They were removed by law. Lucas reached for the page, but stopped before touching it. Read the signature. Margaret did. Edmund Blackwood, Alpha King of Silvercrest. No one spoke. Hannah looked at Lucas. He did not defend his family. He did not look away. The seal beneath the decree caught the fading light, dark and unmistakable. The order that had taught generations to believe Hannah was empty had not vanished with time. Someone wearing Lucas Blackwood's crown had chosen to make it disappear. He erased them because they could stop him. Hannah's words broke the silence in the archive. Margaret Reed looked down at the decree again, then at the older records spread across the table. Not only stop him, she said. They could challenge the ritual itself. Lucas Blackwood stood across from them, his expression unreadable. Daniel Carter shifted closer. What ritual? Margaret pulled a second ledger from the stack and opened it carefully. The Lunar Renewal. Hannah looked up. Tomorrow's ceremony? Margaret nodded. The original version. Victoria Hale, who had been allowed into the archive under supervision, frowned. That ceremony has been performed for generations. Not in its original form. Margaret placed 2 documents side by side. One was written in faded brown ink, the other in cleaner script from 81 years ago. Before the Moonkeepers were removed, the ceremony was described as a covenant between Crown and Pax. Lucas leaned closer. And after? Margaret read the newer wording. A pledge of obedience to the Crown. The difference landed hard. Hannah looked at Lucas. He did not flinch from it. Samuel Whitmore, standing near the doorway, spoke sharply. That is ceremonial language. Nothing more. Hannah turned toward him. Then why remove the people who had authority to object to it? Samuel's jaw tightened. You are interpreting history through resentment. No. Hannah's voice stayed calm. I am reading what your own records say. Margaret closed the newer ledger. There may be more below the sacred Denver. Daniel looked at her. More. The Moonkeeper records refer to a lower archive, one accessible only through the restored chamber. Less than an hour later, Hannah stood again beneath the Moonstone. This time Lucas, Margaret, and Daniel were with her. Victoria and Samuel remained outside. The stone brightened the moment Hannah entered. A second symbol had appeared along the hidden chamber floor, faint but clear. Hannah placed her hand above it without touching. This was not here before. Margaret knelt. Because the first chamber was only an entrance. The floor panel opened slowly after Hannah pressed the Moonkeeper mark. A narrow stair descended beneath the Denver. At the bottom waited a sealed room filled with stone shelves and metal document cases, untouched by dust. Margaret opened the first case. Inside were ritual records older than any in the palace archive. Hannah read over her shoulder. Moonkeeper authority. Yes. Margaret traced the lines. They were not assistants to the crown. Lucas looked at her. What were they? A balance to it. She continued reading. If a ritual relied on coercion, fear, or forced submission, the Moonkeeper could suspend it. Daniel exhaled slowly. So the crown removed the only office with the authority to say no. Lucas stared at the record. My family did. Hannah watched him. You did not write the decree. Lucas looked at her. No. Then what are you going to do with it? He was silent for a long moment. I did not create this law. His voice was low, but I benefited from the world it created. Hannah's expression shifted. It was the first answer he had given that did not sound like a king defending a throne. Margaret opened another case. There is something else. She removed 2 copies of the Lunar Renewal text, one predating the decree, one written immediately after. She laid them beside each other. Hannah compared the lines. This sentence was added later. Lucas followed her finger. The newer version required every attending pack to pledge obedience directly to the crown before receiving the Moonstone blessing. Margaret nodded. The original version did not. Daniel looked at Lucas. Tomorrow's ceremony still uses this wording. The room went quiet. Lucas stared at the altered text. Hannah looked toward the ceiling, where the sacred den waited above them. Then tomorrow is not just a ceremony. Margaret's face tightened. No. Hannah touched the older page carefully. It is the reason the Moonkeepers were erased. Then the ritual must change. Hannah's voice was quiet, but every person in the lower archive heard it. Lucas Blackwood looked from the altered ceremony text to the older version resting beside it. If I cancel tomorrow without explanation, every pack in Silvercrest will assume the crown is unstable. Margaret Reed folded her hands over the original record. And if you continue exactly as planned, you will knowingly repeat the version created after the Moonkeepers were erased. Daniel Carter exhaled slowly. Either choice will spread quickly. Lucas said nothing. Hannah watched him study the 2 texts as though they were opposing roads. You are still thinking about how the packs will react, she said. He looked at her. I have to. Yes. She stepped closer to the table. But that cannot be the only question. What should the other question be? Hannah touched the older page. Whether the ritual deserves to survive in its current form. Samuel Whitmore's voice came from the stair behind them. That is not her decision. Everyone turned. Samuel descended with Victoria Hale several steps behind him. His face was controlled, but his eyes were hard. The Lunar Renewal is older than any living council member. It binds the packs to Silvercrest. You cannot rewrite it because a servant found an old room. Lucas straightened. She found more than a room. Samuel ignored that. Your Majesty, the ceremony should proceed. The wording is symbolic. Hannah looked directly at him. Then why did someone need to erase the people who could say no? Samuel's expression tightened. You keep asking that as though history owes you an apology. No. Hannah's voice remained steady. History owes the truth to everyone still living under it. Victoria glanced toward the records. If the Moonkeeper position is restored overnight, half the noble houses will think the crown has surrendered authority. Lucas looked at her. Restoring a balance is not surrender. Samuel gave a faint shake of his head. You are allowing uncertainty to weaken you. Lucas's gaze hardened. No, I am allowing evidence to change what I know. The room went still. Hannah felt something shift inside her. Not trust yet, but room for it. Lucas gathered both versions of the ritual text. The packs will still assemble tomorrow. Margaret looked up. And the ceremony? I will not perform the altered version until we understand what it asks them to submit to. Samuel stepped forward. You cannot leave the ritual undecided. Lucas met his eyes. I just did. Later that evening, Hannah returned to the sacred den with Margaret to review the Moonkeeper inscriptions once more. The palace above them was crowded with arriving pack representatives. Their voices echoed faintly through the stone. Hannah stood before the Moonstone, which glowed softly whenever she came near. Do you think it woke because of me? She asked. Margaret considered her answer. I think it woke because something that had been silenced was finally close enough to be heard. Hannah looked at the stone. That sounds like the same thing. Maybe. Margaret smiled faintly. But it does not mean you owe anyone a role you did not choose. Hannah absorbed that. Good. Margaret lifted an older ritual scroll. There is still one line I cannot translate. Before Hannah could ask, the chamber doors opened. Daniel entered quickly. We have a problem. Lucas followed him, his expression colder than before. The sacred den has been sealed. Hannah turned. By whom? Daniel looked toward the corridor. An elder order filed under ceremonial security. Margaret's face changed. Samuel. Lucas nodded once. Hannah moved toward the doors. Then open it. Lucas looked at Daniel. The outer locks were changed. Hannah stopped. The Moonstone dimmed behind her. Once. Twice. Then went dark. Silence swallowed the chamber. Margaret stared at it. It has never gone completely dark during renewal week. Hannah looked toward the sealed entrance. It is not the stone they are trying to control. Lucas followed her gaze. It is access to you. Hannah said nothing. Outside the sacred den, new locks had been placed on the doors before dawn ceremony. And for the first time since the Moonstone awakened, Silvercrest would have to decide whether the person it had spent 11 years calling empty was allowed inside the place that had chosen her. The door stays closed, Samuel Whitmore said. His voice carried across the ceremonial hall just before sunrise. Hannah stood outside the sacred den with Margaret Reed at her side, while representatives from nearly every major pack in Silvercrest gathered behind them in uneasy silence. The new locks gleamed against the ancient doors. Samuel faced Lucas Blackwood without lowering his eyes. A wolfless servant has no place inside the renewal. The old insult should have hurt. Instead, Hannah felt strangely calm. The Moonstone had already answered that question. The only people still arguing were the ones afraid of what the answer meant. Lucas looked at the sealed doors, then at Samuel. Who authorized this? The Elder Council. I did not. Samuel's jaw tightened. Ceremonial security falls under elder authority when tradition is threatened. Lucas took one slow step forward. Tradition is not threatened by evidence. It is threatened by disorder. Samuel glanced toward Hannah. And she is disorder. Hannah felt Margaret tense beside her. Lucas did not raise his voice. Who gave you the authority to exclude the person the Moonstone itself recognized? Samuel did not answer. The silence stretched long enough for every witness in the hall to hear it. Lucas turned toward Daniel Carter. Remove the locks. Daniel stepped forward with the palace steward. Samuel moved as if to protest. Lucas looked back at him. Do not confuse my willingness to listen with permission to overrule the crown in secret. The locks were removed one by one. Metal clicked against stone. When the final chain fell away, Lucas placed his hand on the door. Then he stopped. He looked at Hannah. I can open it. She waited. But I will not decide whether you enter. The hall went completely still. Lucas pulled the heavy door open and stepped aside. Not ahead of her. Aside. Your choice. Hannah looked into the dark sacred den yesterday. She had entered carrying a bucket because someone believed cleaning was the only place she belonged. Now every important family in Silvercrest was watching to see whether she would cross the same threshold by choice. Hannah walked forward. The instant her foot touched the inner stone, the Moonstone awakened. No hand touched it. No prayer was spoken. Silver light burst across the chamber and poured through the open doors into the ceremonial hall. Gasps rose behind her. Hannah kept walking. Ancient lines appeared beneath her feet, spreading from the altar across the floor in wide arcs. Margaret entered next, then Lucas, Daniel, Victoria Hale, Samuel, and the pack representatives. The Moonstone grew brighter with each step Hannah took toward it. Samuel stared at the floor. This proves nothing about authority. Then the carvings changed. Letters formed along the central ring, not faint fragments this time, but complete words visible to everyone. Margaret read them aloud, her voice shaking. The Moonkeeper stands beside the crown, never beneath it. The room went silent. Hannah looked at Lucas. He was already looking at her. Not shocked. Not offended. Something closer to understanding. Samuel stepped forward. A ceremonial phrase cannot rewrite law. The Moonstone pulsed again. A second line appeared beneath the first. Daniel leaned closer. Margaret read slowly. When the crown will not listen, the Moonkeeper may end the right. The words seemed to remove the air from the chamber. Every pack leader present turned toward Hannah. For 11 years, she had been taught that having no wolf meant having no voice in sacred matters. Now the oldest power in Silvercrest had placed a choice in her hands that even the Alpha King could not honestly claim as his alone. Samuel's face hardened. You cannot allow this. Lucas turned to him. I am not allowing anything. He looked at Hannah. The stone already did. Hannah stared at the obedience markings carved around the altar, the very lines added after the Moonkeepers had been erased. The renewal was supposed to begin within minutes. Hundreds of people were waiting. Lucas could have taken control. Instead, he stood beside her. What do you see? He asked. Hannah looked at the old symbols, then at the newer ones layered over them. A ritual that forgot how to ask. Lucas's expression changed. And what should happen now? Hannah lifted her eyes to his. Before she could answer, the Moonstone flashed once more, and every obedience symbol around the altar began to glow. Then end it, Lucas said. The words were not loud, but they carried through the sacred den with enough force to silence every elder, noble, priest, and pack representative gathered around the altar. Hannah looked at him. For 1 second, she thought she had misunderstood. Lucas held her gaze. If the Moonkeeper has the authority to stop a ritual built on obedience, then use it. Samuel Whitmore stepped forward. Your Majesty, you cannot hand sacred law to a servant because an ancient inscription glows beneath her feet. Margaret Reed turned toward him. She is not being handed anything. The records confirm the office existed. The stone confirms recognition. The current ritual confirms the very corruption those records warned against. Samuel's face tightened. You would let one unshifted woman overturn 80 years of tradition. Hannah looked at the glowing obedience markings around the altar. No. Everyone turned toward her. She stepped closer to the Moonstone. I am not overturning tradition. I am removing the part someone added after they erased the people allowed to object. The chamber went still. Victoria Hale lowered her eyes. Daniel Carter watched Samuel carefully. Lucas did not move closer to Hannah. He did not take the decision from her. What does the Moonkeeper decide? He asked. Hannah looked at the representatives gathered around the Denver. Some had mocked people like her. Some had stayed silent while others did. Some simply looked afraid. She understood that ending the ritual would be easier than changing what came after. Still, she placed her hand against the Moonstone. Warmth moved through her palm, not like fire, but like recognition. In this version, the stone answered instantly. The obedience symbols surrounding the altar went dark one by one. A murmur swept through the chamber. Then something unexpected happened. The Moonstone did not fade. Silver light spread outward again, but this time it followed older lines hidden beneath the newer carvings. Circles appeared instead of chains. Open hands instead of bowed figures. Margaret's breath caught. The original pattern. Hannah stared at the floor. Words formed along the central ring. Margaret read them aloud. Crown offers protection. Pack offers trust. Neither is taken. Both are given. Lucas looked at the words for a long moment. Consent. Margaret nodded. The original renewal was not obedience. Samuel said nothing. Hannah lifted her hand from the stone. The light remained. Lucas turned toward the gathered pack leaders. Then the old ceremony ends today. Samuel finally found his voice. You are weakening the crown. Lucas looked at him. No. A crown that requires obedience without consent is already weak. The words traveled through the room like another bell. He looked toward Margaret. Restore the Moonkeeper records to the Royal Archive. Then Daniel. Begin a formal review of every ceremonial law changed after the order was removed. Daniel nodded. Lucas continued. And review the treatment of every pack member classified as wolfless solely because they never shifted. That drew the strongest reaction yet. Hannah felt it move through the room. Surprise. Unease. Hope. Lucas turned toward her. For 11 years, this kingdom called you empty because our laws had forgotten how to recognize what you carried. Hannah's throat tightened, but she remained still. Lucas did not soften the truth. That failure belongs to Silvercrest. Not to you. No one in the chamber laughed now. No one looked at her like a servant who had wandered too close to something sacred. The Moonstone glowed steadily behind her. Margaret stepped forward carrying an old ceremonial seal recovered from the lower archive. The Moonkeeper seat can be restored today. Samuel's expression darkened. Victoria looked toward Hannah. Daniel waited. Lucas did not present the seal himself. He left it in Margaret's hands. Only if Hannah chooses it. Margaret held the seal out. Hannah looked down at the silver mark. 11 years ago, she would have taken any title that proved she was not broken. Now she understood that recognition given too quickly could become another kind of cage. She closed Margaret's fingers gently around the seal. Not today. A murmur moved through the chamber. Lucas only nodded. All right. Hannah looked around at the people who had just watched an 80-year ritual change beneath her hand. If this office returns, it should not return because everyone is frightened by what happened this morning. Her eyes moved to Samuel, then Victoria, then Lucas. It should return because Silvercrest understands why it was erased and decides it needs the truth more than it needs comfort. Margaret's expression softened. Lucas looked at Hannah with something deeper than admiration. Respect without possession. Then we will do it properly. Hannah turned back to the Moonstone. Its light remained calm and bright. Behind her, the Alpha King gave the first order of a changed Silvercrest. From this day forward, No one in this kingdom will be called empty simply because our traditions do not know how to name them. 1 month later, the sacred den opened again beneath a different kind of silence. No one stood with bowed heads, waiting to pledge obedience. No elder controlled the doors. No servant was told where she did not belong. Hannah Miller entered wearing a simple silver-gray dress with the restored Moonkeeper seal fastened at her shoulder, not because the palace had chosen a title for her, but because she had finally chosen one for herself. The change had taken weeks. Margaret Reed restored the erased records to the Royal Archive. Daniel Carter helped rewrite ceremonial procedures so no sacred office could be removed without public review. Pack members who had never shifted were called in for new evaluations without shame or punishment. Some had wolves that had simply never awakened. Others did not. For the first time, Silvercrest stopped treating either answer as failure. Hannah had spent most of those weeks refusing every attempt to turn her into a symbol larger than herself. When nobles called her blessed, she corrected them. When servants called her chosen, she reminded them that recognition did not make anyone more human than they had been the day before. Lucas Blackwood watched all of it without trying to claim a place in her decisions. That mattered. On the morning of the new Lunar Renewal, 2 seats stood beside the altar. One bore the crest of the crown. The other carried the restored mark of the Moonkeeper. Neither stood higher. Lucas arrived first, but he did not begin without her. When Hannah stepped into the den, the Moonstone brightened softly. Not with the violent flash of discovery. With something steadier. Familiar. Lucas looked at her. You accepted the permanent seat. Hannah touched the seal at her shoulder. With conditions. A faint smile reached his face. I expected that. The Moonkeeper office remains independent. Agreed. No crown authority over its findings. Agreed. And no one uses me to prove that the system has changed while quietly keeping everything else the same. Lucas's expression became serious. Agreed. Hannah studied him. You say that easily now. I had practice learning what happens when I do not listen. She almost smiled. Almost. The pack representatives gathered behind them. Samuel Whitmore no longer held ceremonial authority while the investigation into the erased records continued. Victoria Hale remained part of the Noble Council, but her role in sacred rites had been removed. No one had been publicly humiliated. The system had simply stopped rewarding the people who defended what should never have been hidden. Margaret approached the altar with the original renewal text. The ceremony requires both offices to consent before it begins. Lucas looked at Hannah. He did not say proceed. He asked, Are you ready? Hannah glanced at the Moonstone, then at the people waiting beyond the altar. Yes. The new ritual was shorter. No pledge of obedience. No forced declaration of loyalty. Pack leaders stepped forward one at a time and offered trust freely. The crown promised protection without ownership. The Moonkeeper witnessed the exchange and could stop it if either side crossed the line. When the final words were spoken, the Moonstone glowed across the floor in wide silver circles. No chains. No bowed figures. Open hands. After the ceremony, Lucas remained beside the altar while the others filed out. Hannah stayed to close the old record book. Will you stay in Silvercrest? He asked. She looked at him. As Moonkeeper. Yes. Not as something the crown owns. Lucas held her gaze. I would not offer it otherwise. Hannah considered him for a long moment. And if I disagree with you publicly? Then I listen publicly. That earned the first real smile he had seen from her. Lucas looked toward the 2 equal seats. I was told all my life that strength meant standing above everyone else. Hannah closed the book. Maybe that is why the stone ignored you. He laughed softly. That is possible. The sound surprised her. Warm, unguarded, human. They turned back toward the Moonstone together. Lucas asked, What happens now? Hannah placed her hand against the silver surface. The light rose gently beneath her palm. Now we ask instead of command. Lucas stepped to the opposite side of the altar. He did not reach for the stone until Hannah nodded. When his hand touched it, the Moonstone brightened for both of them. Not because the Alpha King stood before it. Not because the girl once called Wolfless had become something others could finally respect. It awakened because, for the first time in generations, Crown and Moonkeeper stood beside each other, and neither was required to kneel.